today Mr. Chris King. He's the Senior Vice President International Corporate Service at OTC Markets. Chris has assisted that more than 1,000 companies go public on the US, on OTCQX and QB market. And today we will discuss more about how to access US investors. So Chris, thank you so much. The floor is all yours, my friend.
Thank you. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. As PH mentioned, I head up the International Corporate Services team at OTC Markets Group in New York. First of all, thank you to MZ for hosting. You've been a pleasure to work with, and certainly appreciate all the time and attention from PH, Amanda, and the team. Thank you to everyone else who's joined virtually to learn a little bit more today about OTC markets and how to cost efficiently access the US markets. If we could just open up the slides. Thank you. Before I get into the presentation, I just wanted to give you a summary of the format today. So I'm going to be presenting from some slides for maybe the first 20-25 minutes or so, just summarizing the business, the role that we play in cross-border trading. Really the focus today is, whilst we're a stock market operator within the US with thousands of companies from all over the globe, specifically we're going to be focusing on the opportunity for companies that are already public in LATAM and the opportunity to better access US investors and just have a more efficient and effective US engagement program. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Before I really get into a summary of our business, it's worth perhaps giving you some context for today's presentation. What I hear every day from companies who are already public and have very sophisticated investor relations programs, and those that focus on the US or prioritize the US for either roadshows or conferences, servicing existing shareholder base, or perhaps looking to grow their US ownership. There's several sort of mistakes that are fairly common. So I'll just go through some of these and talk about those a little bit, because ultimately it's our business that fixes these pain points for public companies listed outside the US. The first one, I think this is probably the most common, which is that there's an assumption that US institutions, all US institutions, can buy stock just because you're public. So it really doesn't matter whether you're listed in a country in LATAM or Europe or Asia. The reality is that the larger institutions like a BlackRock or a Vanguard or a State Street, most of those have absolutely no problem in transacting into foreign or non-US exchanges. But certainly if you think about your target audience and you think about the geography in the US is challenging, right? So you're never going to meet with everyone. But if you think about the smaller institutions, the second and third tier institutions, think about the family funds, the family offices, and you think about the retail investor community, they very much rely on tools and services and trading functions that basically OTC Markets provides. So the second mistake that companies make would be that financial advisors can easily trade stocks that are listed outside the US. If you think about the wealth in the US and all of the managed wealth, so these are financial advisors, thousands of financial advisors across the states, there's many reasons why they either can or cannot trade foreign or non-US listed securities. So we'll talk a little bit about the things that we do with regulators to ensure that you as a public company, perhaps listed in Brazil or Mexico or anywhere else throughout LATAM, things that we do to help reduce the trading restrictions. So similar to my first point, the retail investor community, if you're an investor in Brazil and you want to buy Apple or Microsoft or a US exchange listed security, there's an assumption that you can do that from your home account. So if you're in Brazil and you're funding your account in local currency, you should not expect to have to open a US trading account. You probably cannot open a US trading account. You want to have a local currency quotation for Apple or Microsoft as examples, And if you flip that, that's really what the OTC Markets does as a business, is we provide US investors who log on to their Schwab or Fidelity or E-Trade or Ameritrade accounts. These are funded in US dollars, they're US brokerage accounts, and it's our business that lights up the trading screens and allows US brokers to publicly quote Brazilian or Mexican or European companies, for example. So our solution is really about providing a local market hours, US quotations for foreign listed securities. Some of the other perhaps less frequent mistakes that companies make is that there's a belief as they think about the US, they naturally think about Nasdaq and NYSE when they think about US financial markets, whilst clearly they play a very integral role to the US markets. The reality is that most companies exchange. So obviously additional regulation, additional disclosure, certainly far greater and duplicative cost and complexity. And so it's the OTC Markets Group that has become particularly attractive for companies listed outside the US in order to have a US stock market quotation and a convenient way for US investors to trade those foreign stocks. So just to be clear, you do not need to be listed on a US exchange if you want to better access US investors and be traded here. The pink or gray market, you may have heard of these markets. I'll talk a little bit more about our business and how we segment the market. Maybe some of you listening today have maybe an ADR program, maybe you have an unsponsored ADR program. We are the stock market for over 11,000 securities. The majority of those are companies listed outside the US. And so we operate those different market tiers. And again, I'll speak about the benefits of each market tier, but pink is the bottom market tier and it's the default market. And so perhaps some of you listening today have an ADR program that you already have a US ticker, but perhaps you sit on the pink market and have some challenges, limited distribution of information, limited volume or liquidity. And so today, part of the presentation is to think about how to take advantage of that existing pink or gray ticker symbol, which we can then, remove some of the restrictions and just make you more efficient in your marketing to US investors. The SEC filing bullet point. Again, when companies think of the US, they think about regulation, they think about disclosure, they think about SEC filing and the cost. There's no SEC filing requirement to trade on our markets. Most of the companies that trade in from all over the world are able to benefit from their home market disclosure. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, as you think of perhaps your role as IRO, as you think about efficient marketing into the US, one of the key functions that we also in regulation and compliance controls is we provide blue sky exemptions. And so if you have good information and you have research and your hope is that research can be distributed freely to US investors, that isn't going to happen as an automatic function. So we provide a range of services and solutions in trading here. We ensure that that information can be used and redistributed. So next slide, please. So who is OTC Markets Group? We operate the largest ATS in the US, that's Alternative Trading System. So think of us as a technology company rather than a regulator and an exchange. Very minor difference in terms of the trading between the two. But again, there's more than 11,000 companies or securities that are quoted on our market. We connect with over 50 exchanges worldwide. And obviously we're highly regulated. We're SEC registered and FINRA, Financial Regulatory Authority regulated. And as a technology company, if you think about all of the brokers in the US that are trading Nasdaq and NYSE stocks all day, they need a facility on which to be able to connect with other market makers and create liquidity and to trade non-Nasdaq and NYSE stocks. So if you are not listed on Nasdaq or NYSE, again, maybe you already have an ADR program and a ticker of some sort here in the States, it's going to be our platform on which US brokers will be able to quote and trade you. So we provide that efficient mechanism for trading. But again, as you think about the side of that, who is the one thing having market makers, but the other side of our business is, of course, you switch the lights on, you have a quotation here. We connect through all of the US brokerage sites so that the US investment community can efficiently trade the stock. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we segment the market into different tiers. I think really the focus or the educational piece around this presentation is going to be talking about the QX market. QX is the top tier of our market. It's where you'll find many very well-known multinational blue chip names. So many people are often surprised to hear names like Hugo Boss, Heineken, BNP Paribas, Danone. Our largest client is Roche, so just shy of 300 billion in market cap. All of these companies are shareholder friendly, they're transparent, they're listed and highly regulated in their home marketplace, wherever that country might be. But they use the QX market as their US stock market. And so it's just QX is really where I encourage companies who want to be more successful in marketing to a broader US investment community. Obviously, the benefits are many, right? We see on QX, we see higher trading volumes, we see better liquidity, we see more brokers participating and trading securities, and we also ensure that QX companies are far more visible. And so QX becomes a really supportive tool for investor relations teams across the globe. The QB market is really a venture market. It was created in 2014 to help smaller companies who perhaps have lighter balance sheets and lower share prices. QB is a very good marketplace, and it serves about 1,000 companies today, again, from all over the world. And this is, of course, we're talking about secondary market trading. The QB market doesn't have high financial criteria. And so when I talked about QX and better liquidity, more volumes, one of the main reasons for that is when you're on the QX market, you are qualified under your financial strength. There's no penny stocks that trade on QX. As you look at the other end of the spectrum, as you look at the pink market, which is a default marketplace, pink is really where brokers are free to conceptually trade a variety of businesses. You could be a penny stock, you could be bankrupt. I'll use JC Penney and the car rental company Hertz as two very good high-profile examples of companies that went through financial distress. They filed for bankruptcy protection, they get kicked off a US exchange, and really it's the pink market that is the only market available to them to trade on. So you're not a bad company because you find yourself on pink, it is the default, but the reality is that there's many trading restrictions, settlement and clearance challenges. And so pink, because there's no financial strength, there's no disclosure requirement, companies are often very disengaged when they're on the pink market. There's a limited distribution of information. Pink can be problematic and continues to become sort of a more challenging place for companies to trade. So with that point being made, perhaps you're listening to this webinar and maybe you're not aware of whether you have a US ticker symbol or which tier of the market that perhaps you trade on. So it might be at some point interesting to take a look. If you go to the OTCmarkets.com website, there's a quote box. You can put your company name into that quote box, and that's a good starting point for a conversation to explore what your current status is in the US if you have one, and then to explore obviously the option of upgrading to get off of the pink market. Next slide, please. So I think I've summarized these points already. So if you are on pink, then obviously in most cases companies haven't chosen the pink market, but it certainly means that there's lower information distribution and far less visibility available for you as a company on pink, less brokers, lower liquidity, and as I said, lower trading volumes. The grey market, just so that you know, if you come across grey ticker symbol, what grey means is that there's actually no public quotation. There's no public market being made for those companies. So I welcome a conversation with anyone who wants to learn more, of course, but at least you know which tier of the market that you trade on if you have a ticker. Next slide, please. So again, the role that we play here is market operator. We actually have more securities, more companies traded on our market than NYSE and Nasdaq combined, which is often a surprise to people. QX we really position as the best market, not because we've decided that that's the case, but because over the years we've worked with regulators. We've weaved in blue sky exemptions, meaning that your stock can trade more efficiently on QX than it can on other tiers. Blue sky really refers to the protective laws that every state in the US has. The laws were designed to protect the residents from fraud. And so the reason why blue sky exemptions and the QX market have become more important over the years is, let's say that you have an ADR program and it sits on the pink market. The reality is that if you don't have blue sky exemptions, it means that financial advisors and brokers cannot either trade the stock on behalf of clients in the states in which those clients reside. They can't solicit and recommend a security. They can't distribute information on your company. So as we've made the QX market into the best marketplace in the US, a big part of that is those compliance functions that I talked about. I will touch on the visibility program that we operate, but as you think about the US, again, very challenging geographically to efficiently meet with all investors. It's not going to happen despite your best efforts. With lockdown, of course, it becomes even more challenging. And so with QX, we provide CEO interviews, virtual conferences, market opens. We showcase companies in our monthly newsletter. And if at any given time you were to go onto the OTC Markets site, even today, for example, you'd see interviews with CEOs from Canada, from Hong Kong, from Spain, from all over the world. So if we could go to the next slide, please. One of the common questions that we get is, well, how does the trading work? So what I've done here is tried to summarize for you the difference between joining a US exchange and joining QX or QB in the States. On the left-hand side, you'll see that typically what happens is as a company who's public in your home market, you're going to be complying with all of the home stock exchange requirements. And that's your primary listing. When companies join a US exchange like NYSE or Nasdaq, what tends to happen is the primary listing status is lost in the home exchange. So the volume typically gets sucked out of the home exchange, and by being now the primary market, the US exchange, it tends to be the more liquid environment. But of course, in addition to that being a problem for your home exchange, as I mentioned, you're on the hook for SEC filing, Sarbanes-Oxley, and all of those liability and risk components. And then on the right-hand side, you see our business, which is a little different. It's a slightly different model. It's a unique model, but the beauty of this model is that your primary market remains your primary exchange. We are not a stock exchange. You're simply providing a US quotation, and all of those shares have to come from somewhere. So as investors buy more of your shares in the US, those shares have to be sourced. And so it actually complements and supports the home exchange in regards to liquidity, trading volume, and efficiency. So again, there's no SEC filing requirement, no additional disclosure, and you can rely on your home market corporate governance. Next slide, please. Questions I often receive is, well, show me, or can you talk about the results of joining the QX market? So last year we gathered up information. This was just pure trading statistical information around 500 companies that had joined the QX market from another country, from outside the States. So it was over a long period of time. It was a 10-year period. So companies from, there were about 35 different stock exchanges, obviously lots of different industries, different market caps. So we gave that information to a third party to just analyze. Really, it was the home market volume we were interested in. So I think the key results that are worth talking about, number one, obviously with greater access, greater visibility, raise your profile, and a US quotation, US ownership grows. The trading volume on the home exchange was interesting because all companies saw an increase to the home exchange volumes. But as you can imagine, if you're a much larger, if you're a mega cap company joining the market, the expectation isn't going to be that you add 43% of trading volume to your home market. It's just impossible. And so whilst we say that there was on average 26% growth of volumes in the home exchange, obviously in the smaller cap space or the mid cap space, those companies saw a greater increase percentage-wise. And then if you have an ADR program, you probably are aware of the trades that print in the US. Most companies saw a substantial increase to the liquidity of their ADR programs. So taking that from the pink market and putting it on QX will both substantially increase the success of your ADR, but also the home market volume. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So the next few slides, I designed these really just to show you. I think it's easier to see some of the benefits, some of the actual functions that we provide. So I think just in its very basic format, I wanted to put you into the shoes of a US investor. So this is a screenshot of my US brokerage account. This is Ameritrade. And so what I've done here, just to show you why companies are incorrect in assuming that because they're public in, say, Brazil, for example, that a US investor can just access the stock in Brazil. It's impossible for most retail investors, for sure. So what I've done here is I've typed in a Brazilian listed company, and you can see the circled ticker symbol that comes up. It's actually a US ticker symbol. So I've put in the Brazilian company name, but the only option available to me to buy the stock is to trade the US ticker symbol. Next slide, please. What I've done here is trying to show you the sort of the negative connotation of being on the pink market. I mentioned that companies on pink, it's not a deliberate choice, but companies on pink are often completely disconnected. There's a complete lack of information flow disseminated throughout the US brokerage and financial websites. So again, what I've done here is take a Brazilian listed company. This one actually has a sponsored ADR program. So we're the market on which all level 1 ADRs are traded. So highly relevant if you have a sponsored program level 1. And you can see here that as I start to research this company, I put in the company name and there's no data available for financials. Next slide, please. So by contrast, what I've done is take one of the QX clients in LATAM. So JBS, I wanted to just demonstrate to you here that as I do the same thing and I start to research JBS, because they are a QX client and they're posting information to our distribution tool, you can see that all of the financials are readily available. Next slide, please. So again, an example of lack of news flow. So we were looking at financials before. Same company, sponsored ADR program. You can see, well, hopefully you can see the small font, but there's no information being distributed from a news perspective. These are extremely dated and highly relevant for these postings. Next slide, please. So here we have Localiza, been trading on QX since 2012. You can see again that the importance of being a QX client and posting information through our mechanism is that as an investor now, all of the information is being posted and is available in a timely manner. Next slide. So I think these are my final examples around information flow and compliance functions. So Banco do Brasil, this is a good example of a company that naturally has an interest in accessing the US. And I should be clear, all of these companies have a good investor relations team and process, but the reality is that there's going to be things that work against you unless you fix them. So Banco do Brasil has an ADR program, but it's out of compliance in 44 jurisdictions. So what this basically means is for all of those states that you see in white today on this slide, the residents of those states are not going to be able to have the Banco do Brasil shares traded in their managed accounts. Research will be limited in terms of its distribution, and so we want to fix that. Next slide. By contrast, we have one of our larger Mexican QX clients, and you can see here that they have accomplished blue sky exemptions across the US. So far greater efficiency for more trading volume and access. Next slide, please. So I mentioned visibility. When I talk about QX, I do see really the fee that we charge as being contributing towards being more compliant, being more accessible and efficiently traded. But visibility is a key component of any US program. And so I mentioned the virtual conferences that we provide. The interview that you can see in that bottom left-hand corner is BASF. I don't know their market cap today, but certainly a multinational mega cap company, truly a global brand. And for them, perhaps being on the QX market is a very important tool to their US programming. Next slide. The Virtual Investor Conference, for a variety of reasons, have become even more popular this year. You can see here an example of an event that we host. We typically host between 20 and 30 virtual conferences throughout any given year. And the attendance on these obviously differs from event to event, but some of our more successful events have had in excess of 5,000 live presentation views. And typically we see that number double over the 30-day replay period. So you can see here that Hugo Boss participates in our virtual conference programming. But here we have hospitality group, a beverage company, and other sort of consumer brands. Next slide. And next slide, please. So we have many companies that have been on QX for years. We have, if we go to the next slide, we should be able to see some of the companies that are also on QX. Thank you. So like I said, this is a market that supports hundreds of companies from all over the globe. It really provides efficient trading without a great deal of additional complexity, risk, and cost. So yeah, I think this is probably a good time to go to the next slide and maybe open up the call for questions. Amanda, do we have any questions coming in?
Not yet. Let me pull for questions. Just one second.
So one of the questions is, I already have a pink ADR program. So can I take that to the QX market? Hopefully I've answered that question during the presentation. The answer is yes. If you have a pink ticker symbol or a gray ticker symbol that you find on the OTC Markets website, then yes, that's really what we'd be talking about, upgrading to the QX marketplace. the amount of time involved to join QX, if you already have an ADR program, it's actually quite quick and efficient. You're probably talking about maybe a 3-week process. So yeah, I think as part of the follow-up to this presentation, you're very welcome to contact me. In fact, I think there was a slide with my contact details. There we go. Thank you. Okay, next question. How large do you need to be to qualify for QX? The QX market, the 3 criteria really that are important are the share price requirement. So QX has a 25-cent US minimum initial share price requirement. It has a 10 million market cap requirement. But the most important, I think, criteria is the third one, which is really the reason why I believe that QX is far more liquid and more heavily traded, is the penny stock requirement. So this is a test that involves looking at either net tangible assets or revenues on an audited financial. And so if you meet the penny stock exemption, which I can provide more information on after this if you were to email or call me, that really demonstrates to brokers that you meet a variety of financial strength criteria. The QB market is, again, because it's a venture marketplace, it doesn't have financial strength requirements, but it does have the transparency and current reporting requirements. So if you're current in your home market, but perhaps you're a smaller company with a lighter balance sheet, then QB would be the market that you would try to trade on. So one of the earlier questions, it looks like, was, do you have any US investor relations support? I think really the way of looking at this is that we're first and foremost a market operator, but as I mentioned during the presentation, we do place a great deal of value on helping our companies with visibility. So I think as you think about the US, we don't provide strategic investor relations planning, but we provide that wide variety of features that help get more eyeballs on the stock and help you tell your story and engage a much broader audience. Having said that, we do partner with high quality firms, and MZ being one of them, where we're able to help companies understand who they might want to approach for strategic IR planning if needed. Another question, in terms of disclosure, how different is the regulation on QX compared to Nasdaq or NYSE? That really is a major difference here, right? So companies that are on Nasdaq and NYSE have to be SEC filing, Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. There's a large number of costly and rigorous processes that have to be put in place to join Nasdaq or NYSE. And to be frank, for some companies it makes a lot of sense, but for the vast majority of companies, QX is really the market on which to trade, because you are able to rely on your home market volume or home market reporting, or at least there is no SEC filing requirement to trade on QX. Okay, it looks like that's probably the last of the questions as things stand. Again, my contact information is hopefully visible on the screen now. I think MZ have offered to kindly archive this webinar and redistribute it, which will again have my contact information on it. So unless there's any further questions, I'll just say thank you very much for your time this morning and look forward to speaking with you.